what happens to your arm. Can't do it. Now smile at her and send a positive thought. Wow, she volunteered in front of all these people to go up there with Jack. And resist. Can you feel the difference?
Yes.
So what happens here is when you say I can't, when you lie, when you focus on your failures instead of your successes, and when you surround yourself with people who are judgmental rather than encouraging and empowering, it actually has a physical effect on you. So that's how powerful thoughts are. We see that our thoughts affect us and other people's thoughts affect us. So we have to be very careful where we place ourselves and who we hang out with and who we surround ourselves with. Give Marianne a hand for coming up here. Thank you very much. Okay. So partly here, we've just done this thing. This is called a kinesiology demonstration. Kinesiology is a fancy term for muscle testing, all right? And one of the principles here is you have to eliminate the phrase I can't from your vocabulary. I can't, I wish I were able to, I'll try. Those are all ways of saying I'm not capable. And they're very insidious, and it's part of our culture. I actually teach people to wear a rubber band, and if they say something negative about themselves, they just snap themselves when they're aware of it. Not like to really hurt yourself, but just to raise your awareness. In my company, if anyone says I can't or we're not able to, we can't get that done by Friday, you know, they'd say something like, well, we need 8 people to do that. Well, great, call the temporary agency. It can be done by Friday. And if they'd say something negative, it cost them $1. We'd find them. We'd put it in a jar, and at the end of the month, we'd give it to charity. Well, we stopped doing that after a couple of years because no one was doing it anymore, because the culture shifted because of that focus. Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or think you can't, either way, you're right. Why is that? Because if you think you can, you will try. And if you try, you're probably going to pull it off. And if you think you can't, you won't. And if you don't try, then you're not going to get it done at all. Make sense? Okay. Maddie Christensen was a kid I interviewed for our book. Imagine this picture. He has no leg from the knee down on this leg, no leg from the knee down here. 2 prosthetic devices that he's got. His right arm is just a normal prosthetic device, and his left arm from the elbow down is a prosthetic device with a lacrosse stick appended to the end. He is the pitcher on his Little League baseball team, and he can use that to catch the ball. His team, with him as the pitcher, went to the New York State Finals in Little League. He wrestles. He plays basketball. How many of you, if you'd been born with no arms past the elbow and no legs past the knees, would have thought that baseball was your career? But Maddie went for it. I can tell you story after story. I met a kid named Kyle Maynard last year. He wrote a book called No Excuses. We were over in Ireland together. He has no legs past the knees. He was the #2 wrestler in the state of Georgia his senior year in high school, and now wrestles for the Georgia State University Wrestling Club. Wrote a book on Oprah. He can type 150 words a minute with the stubs of his arms. He can eat with a spoon. I mean, he's the most amazing guy. And we say that, and then when I hear that and I look at these people, I think, what's my excuse? What story am I telling me that I can't do something when these people can do that? And I tell you that hopefully to inspire you to realize you can do anything. There's nothing you can't do. And all those people that are out there that are doing anything that you go, wow, that's great, is just a model for you that says this is possible. And if they can do it, I can do it. He said to me when I was interviewing him, he said, you have to give up all of your excuses. He said, you have to become solution-oriented. You have to move in such a way that you're always solving a problem. He said it was just a problem to be solved because he was so passionate about what it is that he wanted to do. Some of you have seen Tony Robbins on television, and he tells a wonderful story that we put in our first Chicken Soup for the Soul book of being in New York. He sent his staff out. He said, I want you to go find a van because I want to take some food, put it in some baskets, about 30 baskets of food, and we'll go give it to the homeless people up in Harlem. So they went out to rent a van. He came back a couple hours later from some radio interviews. There was no van. He said, where's the van? I said, Tony, there are no vans for rent in New York. They're all being used. It was Thanksgiving weekend. They'd all been rented up. He says, well, why didn't you just go get one from someone else? I said, Tony, people own them. They're using them. He says, come on. And they went out on the street. The first van that came by, Tony jumped out in front of it like this and started going like that. Now, Tony must be, I don't know, 7 foot, 8, 10, whatever. He's big. And he said, I learned something about New Yorkers that day. He says, they don't stop. They speed up. So he said that strategy wasn't working. E plus R equals O. We need a different response. So they went to where the cars had to stop, called a traffic light, and then he'd knock on the window and they'd roll it down and he'd say, hi, I'm Tony Robbins. You may know me from TV. But even if you don't, what we're trying to do is rent a van, and find a van. We're glad to pay you to rent it, and we'd like to just get some food and drive it up to Harlem and give it to some homeless people. And they would all say, I don't want to go to Harlem. It might not be safe up there. And so this went on for a half hour, and finally Tony's staff said, Tony, give it up. It's never going to happen. We're not going to get a van. Let's go eat dinner. And Tony said, that's a terrible attitude. We are going to get a van. It's just a numbers game. Well, another half hour went by. And Tony knocked on the window of this one van, and the window went down and told him a story. And the guy said, jump in. And as he jumped in, the driver reached over and picked the hat up off the seat that Tony was about to sit in, the passenger seat, put it on his head. It said Salvation Army. Turns out the guy was the head of the Salvation Army, Captain John Runnan, for all of New York City. And they went and they bought the food, and he said, look, there's a worse place even than Harlem. It's called the South Bronx. Let's go there. And so they went and took 30 baskets of food to people living in these, literally abandoned houses. And he said, we lifted a lot of lives. He said, but more importantly, I raised the consciousness of my staff that day, and they realized there's always a van in New York City. But let's look at what some of the principles are of success that are contained in that story. Number one, Tony had a clear intention. You must know exactly what it is you want. You have to have a goal. You have to have a vision. Number two, he had a positive expectation. He fully expected to get it. Pete Rose, the great baseball player, said, he was interviewed once, he said, when you go up to bat, how often do you expect to get a hit? He said, every time. He said, if I'm not expecting to get a hit, I shouldn't be standing there. And you don't always hit it, but you're going to come from that expectation level. He never gave up because he fully expected the result was going to happen. It was just a matter of time. Number three, he took action. Because a lot of times you have great ideas. I was just here today, a guy was talking about, we were talking about horseback riding, and he said, it'd be neat if they made those gel things they put in the feet to put on the saddle of horses, because your butt gets sore when you ride a horse. And I said, that's a great idea. And he just passed it off. I said, no, you ought to do something about that. How many times have you had a great idea, didn't do anything about it, and then a year later someone did something about it, made a lot of money, got the promotion, etc. So when you have the idea, the inspiration to act, it's time. Act. And you don't have to know it perfectly. You can drive from here to California, wherever you might be, assuming you're not in Hawaii, by going west. And what happens is that you don't have to see the whole route. You only need to see 200 yards ahead of you. At night, you can drive just with your headlights, and the headlights keep moving with you. And your goal in life is to, get in the game. You don't have to see the whole blueprint. You just have to see the next steps, the next steps, the next steps. And if you keep taking the next steps, eventually you get to where you want to go. Does that make sense? And then he persevered. He never gave up. Some people give up too soon. We were rejected by 144 publishers when we did Chicken Soup for the Soul. Most people don't know that. What if we'd have stopped after 100? Said, well, this isn't going to happen. I wouldn't be standing here talking to you today. We just kept on going until we got the result. It took us a year and a half to sell that book, but we sold it. Now, the last thing is called law of attraction. We believe that when you are vibrating at the level of 100% expectancy that you're going to get something, it's already a done deal. Piece of cake, no big deal. We're going to win this thing. We're going to get that contract. I'm going to make this thing happen. Then what happens is the universe literally responds. And we're going to talk about this a little more later. Now, who is the most perfect guy to come in a van for Tony? Could anyone be more perfect than the head of the Salvation Army who knew all the places in New York and was committed to doing this? Well, they had to wait for an hour because he wasn't there yet. See? So sometimes when you're doing this, you're putting on the vision of this should happen by this date. It's okay to set goals like that, but sometimes it takes a week longer, a year longer, whatever. But law of attraction says if you'll just hold the expectancy, like attracts like. If you say, I want to be a millionaire, but I don't know anyone that would ever teach me how to do that, or I want to buy a car, but I don't have any money, then what you're doing is saying, it's like calling up Domino's Pizza and saying, send me a pizza, and calling them up a minute later and saying, never mind. It's like, you've got to create the space mentally to hold this vision that you've got. And that requires expectation and then knowing that the perfect thing is on its way, just as it was in that situation for Tony. In the Success Principles, I write about a woman named Catherine Lonigan. Catherine Lonigan went off to college. She wanted to be a writer, and she took her first writing class, and she got an F. And she went to see the teacher and said, why did I get an F? He says, because you can't write. She says, well, I'm on a scholarship, here to be a writer. I came to be in the creative writing program. I was the editor of my yearbook, editor of my school newspaper. I wrote a play that was performed in high school. They told me I was gifted. I said, well, you're not. He said, if you stay in my class, you're going to flunk it. And if you flunk my class, you'll lose your scholarship. And she said, well, what do I do? He said, I'll make a deal with you. If you promise never to write again, just, history papers and stuff, but you're not going to try to be a writer, I'll give you a passing grade. You'll keep your scholarship, change your major. So she did. I called it, she made the deal with the devil. 15 years later, she's down in Texas. They're making a movie at the next town over, and down where she lived in Texas, people would show up at the gas station after it rained just to see the oil slick. It was kind of boring there. So she said, wow, they're making a movie. Let's go. So everyone drives over, and everyone's talking to the movie stars. She's talking to the writers, saying, what's going on? What's happening? And why are you interested in us? Why not the movie stars? Well, I always wanted to be a writer. And the guy said, BS. If you wanted to be a writer, you would have written. She said, I was told on good authority I couldn't write. He was a Harvard professor visiting our campus that year. He said, that's BS. He said, what I want you to do is go write something.